Before the Europeans settled along the coast of North America, the Mi'kmaq and Malseet First Nations had made their home in the area surrounding the Bay of Fundy. French settlers were the first Europeans to establish permanent settlements and farms on the shores. The relationship between the First Nations and French settlers was positive. The First Nations groups did not mind the settlers because they did not interfere with their way of life. Over time, the French and Mi'kmaq intermarried and the first Acadians were born. Acadians called their settlement Acadia. Makes sense, right? Over the years, they created their own way of life that was based on fishing and unique farming methods. Most Acadians spoke French and were Catholic. Although they had roots tied to the French and First Nations cultures, Acadians saw themselves as an independent and unique people. Does this sound familiar? Well, let's think for a minute. Thinking. Oh, yep, it's coming to me. Yes. Oh, the Métis. Those French, they are just so friendly with the First Nations people. Acadians lived peacefully in Acadia for more than 150 years. But, as you have all seen before, 150 years seems like the magic number for change. For centuries, France and Britain had been at war with each other, each trying to conquer valuable and/or strategic territory all over the world, much like the object of the game Risk. At the end of each war, a treaty was signed that stated the winner and who had control of what land. Think Risk for a moment. You challenge an opponent and roll the dice. If you win enough times, you get to move your soldiers in. Now, imagine if you got an added territory, a territory of great value, a territory like, you guessed it, Acadia! Acadia was a valuable territory and strategically located. Acadia was on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean, which was good for trade with, well, think about it. Where do you have easy access to? Think. If you said Europe, you are paying attention and smart. Gold star worthy. Strategically, Acadia was at the entrance of the Gulf of the St. Lawrence, which led to the St. Lawrence River, which led to the Great Lakes and the interior of North America. Wow! Don't forget about the Atlantic fisheries. Control over the Atlantic fisheries and good farmland also made Acadia a sought-after territory. Imagine all of that in one little colony. What a bargain, eh? Although initially Acadia was under French control during the 1600s, the control of Acadia had changed hands many times. Treaties signed after wars fought all over the world between Britain and France often included Acadia. So if this is a little difficult for you to understand, try and think of it this way. Acadia is the game ball that is being passed back and forth in a basketball game between the French and the English. The winner of the game gets to keep the game ball. Now, stay with me here, folks. This next part gets a little bit tricky. Between 1701 and 1713, Britain fought to maintain firm control of Acadia. When King Charles II of Spain died in 1700, he left the throne to Philip, the grandson of Louis XIV, King of France. Philip becomes known as Philip V, King of Spain. This prompts a war between France, Britain, Spain, the Dutch, and Austria. And this war is called the War of the Spanish Succession. But to those who lived in North America, this war was called Queen Anne's War. Confusing, right? So let's review. The King of Spain dies and gives the throne to Philip, grandson to the French king. This makes other countries mad. That's because French is getting too powerful, and a war begins in Europe. But it doesn't stop there. The same war fought across the Atlantic Ocean also causes conflict in North America between the French and English. This brings us to our next part. The war ended in 1713 with the signing of the Treaty of Utrecht, which granted Britain control of Acadia, and they renamed the colony Nova Scotia. Things are looking good, right? Maybe this could be the one that finally ends conflict between these two countries. Well, if you are thinking that, you are wrong. The treaty was little more than a temporary truce between the two countries and really left the door open to further dispute, which ultimately leads to the 7 Years' War. But we will talk about that later. After the Treaty of Utrecht, Acadians were able to live peacefully and continue to farm and fish for about 40 years. British left them alone, and they did not see the Acadians as any threat. But, always a but, things are about to change. Remember, the treaty was little more than a truce between Britain and France, and in Europe, tensions between these two countries continued to build. Britain had always wanted to populate the colony with more English people. Does this sound familiar? Yeah. Do you remember something called the Great Migration? For those of you who don't, a quick recap. British know that they can't get rid of the French and they can't assimilate the French. So, what do? They bring more English! As the tensions rose between France and Britain, the English governor, Charles Lawrence, worried that the Acadians would side with the French if a war broke out. The Mi'kmaq and Malseet had strong trade and family ties to the Acadians, and over the years they had captured hundreds of English ships. Charles Lawrence was also concerned because despite attempts made by the English over the years, Acadians refused to swear loyalty to the British Crown. A conversation may have sounded like Governor Lawrence.
Would you like to swear loyalty to the British Crown?
Acadian. Yeah, thanks, but no. Governor Lawrence.
Are you sure you don't want to swear loyalty?
Acadian. Thanks, but no. Governor Lawrence.
I think it would be a good idea if you Acadians swore loyalty to the British Crown.
Yeah, thanks, but no. Finally, by 1755, Britain had had enough and gave the Acadians an ultimatum, a threat with serious penalties. Governor Lawrence.
Acadians will swear loyalty to the British Crown or lose your land.
Acadian. Thanks, but no. But we promise to remain neutral if you go to war with France. Governor Lawrence.
That's it! No land for you!
British soldiers were sent to Acadian villages, and Acadians were rounded up at gunpoint. People were forced to leave their homes and farms with only what they could carry. Families were split up and forced to board ships bound for unknown destinations. The soldiers burned homes and churches and destroyed farms and drove off animals. Many Acadians died of disease, drowning, or starvation during the deportation. Those who survived were sent to the Caribbean, France, or England. Some Acadians escaped and others fled to New Orleans and Louisiana, areas that were still part of New France. In all, about 10,000 Acadians were driven from their homes. Why would the British go to such lengths to send these people to so many different places? That's a great question, and I'm glad that you asked. Well, if you separate families and they are dispersed all over the place, what is less likely to happen? Another great question. Well, let's think again for a moment. All right, don't hurt yourself. We're almost at the end. Okay, I'll give you the answer. The British wanted to eliminate what they thought was a threat. And if you break up families and spread them out, it is less likely that they would be able to come together again and cause trouble. Since the deportation 250 years ago, Acadians have found their way back to New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island along the coast of the Bay of Fundy. Acadians are committed to preserving their culture and way of life. Today, there are 300,000 Acadians living along the Atlantic coast, and they preserved their culture. And let us not forget the Mi'kmaq and Malseet. Remember, these two groups had strong trading and family ties with the Acadians. They had attacked British ships and were basically just a thorn in the side of the English. However, after the deportation of the Acadians, the First Nations abided by the wishes of the British for fear that they too would be forced to leave. So why is this so important? Well, let me give you the answer. Things are going to continue to change for the First Nations. They will continue to get involved in the conflicts between the French and English, and no matter who wins, they will always seem to lose. Stay tuned. More to come on that story.